What if everything you've been taught about the origins of monotheism is wrong? What if I told you that the roots of the world's major religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, stretch deep into the African continent long before the Abrahamic faiths even existed? For centuries, history has been told from one side, a side that has buried the truth, leaving us to wonder, how did a small group of people in the Middle East come to shape the faiths that now govern billions of lives? But what if the real story, hidden in plain sight, points to an entirely different origin? The Star of David, that sacred symbol of Judaism, has its true origins in ancient African temples, not the Holy Land. The practices of circumcision, monotheism, and divine law were not novelties introduced by the Hebrews. They were concepts that were already in practice across Africa long before Abraham's covenant with God. So, what's really going on here? In this video, you will uncover the untold story of how ancient African civilizations, like those of Egypt and Sudan, laid the foundation for the monotheistic beliefs we associate with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam today. You'll understand how the African god Amun, revered as the singular force behind the universe, shaped not just Egyptian religious thought, but was also the very bedrock upon which Abrahamic faiths would be built. And we'll explore why these monumental truths have been overshadowed by centuries of misinformation. We'll dive into how African civilizations practiced monotheism, the legacy of their beliefs that shaped the Hebrews, and the ways in which their influence remains woven into the fabric of world religions today. From the ancient Star of David to the practices shared between the Egyptians and Hebrews, we'll answer questions that have been buried for too long. What if the story of the Black Israelites, the story of the Hebrews, and the rise of Abrahamic religions was not a tale of isolated cultural development, but rather one of profound exchange between ancient African peoples and the earliest Semitic tribes? Stick with me through this journey, and I promise you, the truth will not only challenge what you think you know, but will heal the wounds of history and reveal the deep interconnectedness of all humanity's spiritual origins. Don't forget to comment below with your thoughts. Let's talk about this. Hit like, subscribe, and join us in uncovering the truth that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. In the ancient heart of Africa, long before the birth of the three Abrahamic religions, there was a profound understanding of a singular, all-powerful creator. For thousands of years, African civilizations like Egypt and Sudan knew that there was only one divine force governing the universe. They didn't need to wait for the dawn of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam to begin their quest for understanding the divine. They had already grasped the idea of monotheism. Imagine, if you will, the ancient Egyptian temples, sacred spaces carved from stone, walls adorned with symbols and intricate hieroglyphs that told stories of a singular God who was both omnipotent and omnipresent. This God was Amun, often represented as an unseen and formless entity, the supreme creator who connected everything on earth to the heavens. The Egyptians understood that the divine was both within them and beyond them, that it lived in the stars, in the rivers, and in the very air they breathed. This was not just a distant, abstract concept, it was a lived experience. When you think of Amun, you must understand that the belief in a singular, all-encompassing creator was something that had already formed the foundation of daily life in Egypt and Sudan, long before Abraham ever journeyed into the lands of Canaan. And this same understanding of a singular, loving, and omnipotent God spread far beyond the borders of ancient Egypt, influencing not just neighboring African cultures, but also the very foundation of what we now call the Abrahamic faiths. Let us take a step further into history. The ancient Egyptian practices of circumcision, sacred rituals, and even the reverence for divine law all mirrored what would later become central tenets of Judaism. You see, these practices were not new or foreign concepts to the Hebrews, as they are often portrayed. Rather, they were borrowed from a culture that had long recognized the importance of sacred rituals and divine laws in maintaining the cosmic order. In fact, the idea of being chosen, of being the people of the Creator, which is so central to the Jewish faith, was already present in the Nile Valley. The ancient Egyptians saw themselves as the children of the Creator, the ones who had been chosen to uphold the divine laws and to maintain harmony with the universe. You might wonder, how did these practices and beliefs come to be so closely linked to what we now know as Judaism? The answer lies in the interactions between the Egyptians and the Semitic people, specifically the Canaanites and the Hebrews. As these groups of people began to settle in the Nile Valley, they were exposed to the rich cultural and spiritual practices of the Egyptians. It was here, in the crucible of African spirituality, that the concept of monotheism began to take root in the Semitic world. One of the most powerful symbols to emerge from these interactions was the Star of David. The Star of David is a symbol now universally recognized as a central emblem of Judaism. However, many are unaware of its African origins. The star's hexagonal design, a fusion of two triangles, was used long before it became a symbol of Judaism. In ancient Egypt, the same shape appeared in sacred Egyptian temples, where it represented the connection between the heavens and the earth. The two pyramids reaching toward the sky and grounding themselves into the earth were symbolic of the eternal connection between the physical and the spiritual realms. But it wasn't until the 19th century that the Star of David became widely recognized as the symbol of the Jewish people. The symbol was integrated into Jewish mysticism, particularly through Kabbalah, and was adopted during the rise of Jewish nationalism in the Zionist movement. The question we must ask ourselves is, why did a symbol so deeply rooted in African spiritual traditions become synonymous with the Jewish people, a people who had been influenced by these same African traditions? The answer is simple but profound. Because the roots of Judaism are inextricably linked to the spiritual practices and beliefs of ancient African cultures. Judaism, like all religions, didn't emerge in isolation. It grew out of a long history of cultural and spiritual exchange. The story of the Hebrews, the Israelites, is one that was shaped by the teachings and practices of the ancient African world, from Egypt to Sudan, and from the Nubian kingdoms to the mighty pharaohs who ruled over the lands along the Nile. In exploring this, we begin to see the true interconnectedness of humanity. The story of the Black Israelites, often told as a singular and separate narrative, is really a story of unity, a story that connects the peoples of Africa with those of the Middle East, a story that transcends borders, nations, and time. It is a story of spiritual exchange, where the Egyptians passed on their sacred knowledge to the Hebrews, and the Hebrews, in turn, carried these teachings with them to shape the future of world religions. But perhaps the most powerful lesson we can take from this understanding is that the divine connection between humanity and the Creator is not defined by borders or by skin color. It is a connection that transcends the physical, uniting all of us under the same Creator. This shared heritage, this shared understanding of the divine, is something that all people can trace back to Africa, to the ancient civilizations that knew, long before anyone else, that there was but one true God. And so, as we reflect on the origins of monotheism, let us remember that the roots of our shared spiritual history are deeply intertwined with Africa. The belief in one Creator, the rituals of circumcision, the sacred understanding of divine law, all of these were not innovations of the Hebrews or other Semitic peoples. They were inherited, passed down from one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, the civilization of Egypt, a civilization whose wisdom and knowledge continue to shape our world today. Now, Let us turn our gaze to the Hebrew people, to the formation of Judaism, and the ways in which these African spiritual practices continue to resonate through the ages. It is not just a matter of who is right or wrong, but of understanding the profound ways in which humanity has shared spiritual knowledge across cultures and generations. The truths of Africa are, and always have been, the truths of the world. And it is time we embrace this shared history, to honor the African contributions to world religions, and to heal the wounds of the past with the knowledge that we are all part of the same divine tapestry, woven together by the hands of the Creator. As we move forward in this journey of discovery, let us open our hearts to the ancient wisdom that has been passed down through the ages, and let us celebrate the powerful legacy of monotheism that began in the heart of Africa, a legacy that continues to guide and inspire us today. The history of monotheism is often told as a story of isolation, of one people, one tribe, one faith, rising above the rest to proclaim the singular truth of a single God. But the reality is far more intricate and deeply interconnected. The Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, did not spring up out of nothing. They were not born in a vacuum. They grew, flourished, and evolved through millennia of spiritual exchange and shared wisdom. And at the heart of this exchange is the profound influence of Africa. In the ancient world, long before the arrival of Abraham in Canaan, the Egyptians, with their advanced understanding of the cosmos, had already embraced the idea of one supreme God, Amun. This concept of a singular divine force was not new when Abraham is introduced into the biblical narrative. It had already been established in Africa for centuries. The gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt were not isolated deities, each with their own domain. Rather, they were seen as manifestations of a singular divine essence. Amun, the hidden one, the source of all life and creation. In this understanding, the divine existed everywhere and in everything. From the high mountains to the depths of the Nile, from the sun's radiant light to the deepest shadows of the earth, the Creator was present, guiding and shaping the world. When the Hebrews, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, came into contact with Egypt and the surrounding African civilizations, they were exposed to this profound spiritual understanding. But they did not simply adopt these ideas wholesale. They transformed them. They took the concept of a single God and shaped it into something uniquely their own. Yet the core idea, the idea that there is but one Creator who holds the universe together, remained constant. The story of Abraham's covenant with God is not just a simple narrative of faith. It is a story of spiritual evolution. Abraham, who is often hailed as the first monotheist, did not bring something entirely new into the world. Instead, he embraced the knowledge that was already present in the world around him. The belief in one God, an omnipotent creator who watches over humanity, was not a sudden revelation. It was a natural progression of the spiritual wisdom that had long existed in Africa. Abraham's journey was one of refinement, of deepening an understanding of the Creator that had been established by African civilizations long before. As Abraham's descendants moved from Egypt to the land of Canaan, they carried these ideas with them. But the ancient wisdom they carried was not just intellectual, it was embodied in the practices and rituals of the time. One of the most important of these practices was the ritual of circumcision. While circumcision is today most often associated with Judaism, its origins lie in ancient African practices. The Egyptians practiced circumcision long before the Hebrews did. The act was a physical manifestation of the covenant with God, a reminder that the Creator had marked them as His people. And while this practice was adopted by the Hebrews, its roots were deeply African. This connection between African spirituality and the early Hebrews goes beyond just rituals. It is embedded in the very structure of their faith. The Hebrews, like the Egyptians, understood that the divine was both transcendent and immanent, that God existed both beyond the physical world and within it. The Hebrews, like the Egyptians, saw the Creator in everything: the stars in the heavens, the rivers that flowed through the land, the very air they breathed. This understanding of the divine as all-encompassing, as both a creator and a sustainer, was passed down through the generations. It formed the foundation for what would become the teachings of Judaism and later Christianity and Islam. It is in this shared spiritual heritage, in this deep connection between the ancient African worldview and the teachings of the Hebrews, that we find the true origins of the Abrahamic religions. The spiritual practices that emerged from the African continent were not simply passed down, they were adopted, adapted, and transformed. The Hebrews did not simply follow the teachings of their Egyptian neighbors, they took what they had learned and built upon it, creating something entirely new and yet profoundly connected to the wisdom of the past. And this is where the story of the Abrahamic religions begins, not in isolation, but in a rich tapestry of spiritual exchange that spanned continents and cultures. But this understanding is not only vital for our historical knowledge, it holds profound implications for how we view religion today. When we look at the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we see that these faiths were not born in a vacuum. They were shaped by the wisdom and practices of countless cultures, especially those of Africa. To understand this is to recognize that the divine is not confined to one place or one people. The wisdom of the Creator has been shared with all of humanity across time and space in ways both subtle and profound. The Abrahamic faiths are not the sole possessors of truth. They are part of a greater, more expansive spiritual heritage that stretches back to the very beginnings of human civilization. The African foundation of Hebrew practices. To truly understand the origins of Hebrew practices and their deep connection to African traditions, we must look beyond the surface and delve into the rituals, symbols, and teachings that have shaped not just Judaism, but Christianity and Islam as well. One of the most profound influences of African spirituality on the Hebrew tradition is found in the understanding of God's divine presence. The African concept of the Creator as both transcendent and immanent can be found throughout the Hebrew Bible. In the same way that ancient African civilizations understood the Creator to be both above and below, so too did the Hebrews understand God's presence to be both beyond their reach and intimately close to their lives. This is most clearly seen in the early Hebrew understanding of God's covenant with his people, a covenant that was not just a promise of protection, but a deeply spiritual bond that connected the people of Israel to the Creator. This understanding of divine law, as something that governs not only the heavens but also the earth, was a concept that originated in African spiritual traditions. The laws that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai were not simply divine commands, they were the embodiment of a cosmic order that had been established long before. The teachings of the Torah, with its strict codes of morality and ethics, its understanding of justice and righteousness, were not isolated ideas. They were deeply rooted in African traditions that had long recognized the importance of maintaining harmony with the divine order. One of the most striking examples of African influence on Hebrew practices is the idea of the chosen people. The concept of being chosen by the Creator is central to both Judaism and Christianity. But where did this idea come from? The answer lies in the African tradition of divine election. In ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh was seen as the divine ruler, chosen by the gods to maintain order and protect the land. This concept of divine selection was not limited to Egypt. It extended throughout Africa, where kings and leaders were often seen as divinely appointed. The Hebrews, like their African neighbors, believed that they were chosen by God to fulfill a special role in the world. This idea of divine selection was not a new concept introduced by Abraham or Moses. It was a continuation of the ancient African understanding of divine election. Another key practice that the Hebrews inherited from African traditions was the observance of sacred rituals. The Hebrew Bible is full of stories of rituals and sacrifices, rituals that were seen as a way of maintaining harmony with the Creator. These rituals were not just symbolic acts, they were deeply spiritual, designed to bring the worshipper into direct communion with the divine. The rituals of the Hebrew people from the Passover to the Day of Atonement were not isolated inventions. They were part of a larger spiritual tradition that had been passed down from the African civilizations that preceded them. Perhaps one of the most powerful examples of African influence on Hebrew practices is the idea of sacrifice. In the ancient African world, sacrifice was seen as a way of honoring the Creator, of offering something of value to maintain harmony with the divine. This practice was deeply embedded in the religious traditions of Egypt and Sudan, and it was adopted by the Hebrews in their worship of God. The sacrificial system of the Hebrew Bible, with its emphasis on atonement and reconciliation, was not a new concept. It was an extension of the ancient African understanding of sacrifice as a way to maintain balance with the divine order. As we look at these practices, rituals, and beliefs, it becomes clear that the foundations of Hebrew spirituality are deeply intertwined with the spiritual traditions of Africa. The story of the Hebrews is not one of isolation. It is a story of connection, of exchange, of learning from the wisdom of the African civilizations that came before them. The Hebrew Bible is not just a record of Jewish history. It is a reflection of the larger, shared spiritual heritage that connects all people to the divine. And it is time we recognize the African roots of these practices and honor the deep spiritual legacy that has shaped not only Judaism, but Christianity and Islam as well. The story of the Exodus has been recited through generations, a foundational myth in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But what if we stop to question the narrative we've been handed down through the ages? What if the story of Moses, the Exodus, and the journey of the Hebrews into the Promised Land was not a sudden divine intervention, but a continuation of religious and cultural shifts that had begun centuries before? The Exodus is not merely a miraculous event in isolation, but a reflection of deep spiritual currents that flowed through the ancient world, especially through the lands of Egypt. Let's walk back in time. Imagine the ancient city of Thebes, where Pharaoh Akhenaten sought to transform Egypt's polytheistic religious landscape into one that worshipped the sun disk, Aten. He was the first to declare that there was but one true God, a radical departure from centuries of worship of multiple gods. Pharaoh Akhenaten's revolution in religious thinking mirrored the spiritual transformation that would come to define monotheism in the Western world. His ideas, though controversial and ultimately suppressed after his death, laid the groundwork for future generations. It is no coincidence that the story of Moses, the man who led the Israelites out of Egypt, also marks a turning point in religious identity. The Exodus, which we often interpret as the moment God chose to reveal himself to the Israelites, can also be seen as a culmination of the religious shifts that were already happening in Egypt. Moses, whose story is intertwined with the reign of Akhenaten, was likely influenced by the Egyptian religious reforms that sought to worship one true God. This isn't to say Moses was simply mimicking Akhenaten's revolution, but rather that the spiritual environment of ancient Egypt, already steeped in ideas of a singular creator, profoundly shaped Moses' understanding of the divine. As Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, he wasn't just freeing them from physical bondage, he was helping them make a spiritual leap, a transition from polytheism to the worship of a singular omnipotent God. But this wasn't something entirely new. It was an evolution, one deeply rooted in African spiritual traditions. The Egyptian concept of Aten as the one true God was not just an isolated belief. It was part of a broader African tradition of monotheism, where the divine was understood to be all-encompassing, both within and beyond the world we see. This is the divine vision that Moses carried forward, an understanding that the God of Israel, like the God of Egypt, was both transcendent and immanent, all-knowing and all-powerful. The Exodus, therefore, is not just a singular event in Jewish history. It represents a profound cultural and religious shift, one that was influenced by Egypt's own struggle with its polytheistic traditions. And so, the idea that the Hebrews were the first to embrace monotheism, as is often taught, is only part of the story. The truth is that their journey was shaped by the broader spiritual currents that flowed through Africa, particularly Egypt. This understanding helps us see the Exodus as part of a larger tapestry of religious evolution, an ongoing dialogue between cultures and faiths that spanned generations and civilizations. Now, consider the merging of African and Semitic cultures. The ancient Israelites were not isolated from the world around them. Their interactions with the Egyptians, Canaanites, and other African peoples were foundational in shaping their religious and cultural identity. The Hebrews, as they encountered the great African civilizations, absorbed more than just material goods or political influence. They absorbed profound spiritual wisdom that would later form the foundation of their own religious practices. The blending of African and Semitic cultures is evident in the Hebrew Bible itself. The stories of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah are not just genealogies or mythic tales, they are reflections of the intercultural exchanges that took place over centuries. The Bible itself is filled with stories of Hebrews interacting with African peoples, from their sojourn in Egypt to their encounters with the Canaanites. These interactions were not simply political or economic, they were deeply spiritual, shaping the very way the Hebrews understood God, morality, and community. The concept of monotheism that emerged among the Hebrews was not a mere invention of a single people, it was a product of the cultural melting pot that existed in the ancient Near East. The Egyptian and Canaanite cultures, which were steeped in religious practices that emphasized a connection to the divine, profoundly influenced the development of Hebrew spirituality. The practices of circumcision, of making offerings to the divine, and of maintaining rituals to honor God were not new to the Hebrews. These practices had been handed down from their African ancestors, and through them, the Hebrews were able to maintain their connection to the Creator, even as they established their own religious identity. One striking example of this shared cultural heritage is the story of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who meets Abraham after his victory over the kings who had taken Lot captive. In this encounter, Melchizedek blesses Abraham in the name of God Most High and offers him bread and wine. This moment is not only significant because it marks the first encounter between Abraham and a foreign king, but it also highlights the continuity between African and Semitic religious practices. The offering of bread and wine, long a part of African religious rituals, was later adopted by the Hebrews and became central to their religious ceremonies. It is a powerful reminder that the spiritual practices of the Hebrews were deeply influenced by the African cultures with which they interacted. As the Hebrews settled in Canaan and began to establish their own identity, they continued to adopt and adapt the religious practices they had encountered in Egypt and other parts of Africa. The Hebrew Bible is filled with references to the Israelites' interactions with their African neighbors, from their time in Egypt to their encounters with the Canaanites. These interactions helped shape their understanding of the divine and their role in the world. The merging of African and Semitic cultures also played a key role in the formation of the Hebrew concept of the chosen people. This idea, which has been central to Jewish identity for millennia, is rooted in the African understanding of divine election. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was seen as the divinely chosen ruler, appointed by the gods to maintain cosmic order and ensure the prosperity of the land. This idea of divine election was not unique to Egypt. It was shared by many African cultures and was adopted by the Hebrews as they developed their own understanding of their relationship with the divine. The Hebrews, like the Egyptians, believed they were chosen by God to fulfill a special purpose on earth. This belief in divine election is what gave the Hebrews their sense of mission and identity. It is what drove them to follow God's commandments, to seek righteousness, and to build a community that would honor God's will. The idea of being the chosen people was not a claim of superiority, but rather a recognition of the sacred responsibility that came with their relationship to the Creator. As we reflect on the merging of African and Semitic cultures, it becomes clear that the story of the Hebrews is not one of isolation, but one of connection. The Hebrews were not simply a people apart. They were part of a larger, interconnected world of cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions. Their journey was shaped by the wisdom of Africa, a wisdom that has been passed down through generations and continues to shape the spiritual landscape of the world today. This shared legacy of African and Semitic cultures is not just a matter of history, it is a reminder of the profound spiritual connections that bind all of humanity together. The religions we follow, the spiritual practices we uphold, and the beliefs we hold dear are not isolated or separate. They are part of a larger shared heritage that spans continents, cultures, and time. And in recognizing this, we can heal the divisions that have separated us, embracing the truth that we are all part of the same divine tapestry, woven together by the hands of the Creator. As we take a step back from the familiar pages of Scripture and delve into the deeper layers of history, we find that the story of monotheism isn't confined to the religious texts we hold dear. It is also embedded in the very fabric of human civilization, woven into the evidence left behind by ancient peoples. The Bible, while rich with spiritual guidance, is but one part of the vast tapestry of our collective religious history. To understand the true origins of monotheism and the profound African influence on the Abrahamic faiths, we must also look beyond the sacred scriptures to the archaeological, linguistic, and cultural evidence that stretches across time and space. For centuries, scholars and theologians have examined the Bible, tracing its origins and interpreting its meaning. Yet, for all its power, the Bible cannot be our only source of truth when it comes to understanding the beginnings of monotheism. The scriptures, although sacred, were written by human hands, influenced by the cultures and histories that surrounded them. The real story, the one that transcends the boundaries of any single religion, lies in the evidence left behind by the ancient African civilizations that predates the emergence of the Abrahamic faiths. The monuments of Egypt, the tombs, the temples, and the sacred texts of this ancient civilization all tell a story of a people who, long before the Hebrews, embraced the idea of a single, omnipotent God. This wasn't a mere philosophical idea, but a living, breathing truth that shaped the daily lives of the Egyptians. The worship of Amun as the hidden creator, the one God, speaks of a long-standing tradition that had already recognized the oneness of the divine. But it is not only in Egypt that we see the origins of monotheism. The Nubian civilizations to the south, the civilizations that occupied what is now modern Sudan, also worshipped a singular divine force. These African cultures, with their rich spiritual practices and complex understanding of the cosmos, laid the foundation for the religious thinking that would later permeate the Near East and the broader world. One of the most striking pieces of evidence that confirms this African influence on the Abrahamic religions is the understanding of divine law. The idea that divine laws should govern human conduct, that there is an inherent moral order to the universe, was not a new concept introduced by Moses. It was a principle that had been long understood by African cultures who saw their kings and priests as the intermediaries between the divine and the mortal realm. The codes of conduct, the rituals, and the laws that governed the ancient African world became the blueprint for the laws that would later be codified in the Hebrew Bible. As we move beyond the Bible and into the realm of historical evidence, we find that the connections between Africa and the development of monotheism are irrefutable. The early evidence of monotheism, of a singular creator, exists in the very stones of Egypt, in the ancient hieroglyphs, and in the religious texts that preceded the writings of the Hebrew Bible. But the true power of this evidence lies not in its ability to prove or disprove religious doctrine. Rather, it lies in its ability to open our eyes to the deep interconnections between cultures and to reveal the shared spiritual heritage of humanity. This shared legacy of African monotheism didn't end with the fall of ancient Egypt or the collapse of the Nubian kingdoms. It continued to influence the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three great Abrahamic religions that have shaped the spiritual landscape of the world. The profound understanding of the divine that was developed in Africa didn't simply vanish. It evolved, passed down through generations, and found its way into the religious traditions of the Hebrews, the Christians, and the Muslims. As we look at modern religions, we can still see the influence of African monotheism in the way these religions understand God. The emphasis on a singular, all-powerful creator, the belief in a personal relationship with the divine, and the importance of following divine law are all concepts that have their roots in the ancient African spiritual traditions. But perhaps the most profound legacy of African monotheism is the understanding that the Creator is not distant and separate from creation, but intimately involved in the lives of His people. This understanding, which has been passed down through generations, continues to shape our spiritual lives today. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we find a shared vision of a personal God who cares for His creation, who speaks to His people, and who guides them through life. This vision is not confined to one people or one faith, but is part of a larger, global spiritual legacy that has been shaped by the wisdom of Africa. This understanding of the Creator as both transcendent and immanent, as both beyond and within, is a central theme in all three of the Abrahamic faiths. It is a theme that speaks to the deep spiritual connections that exist between all people, regardless of their cultural or religious backgrounds. And it is a theme that reflects the ancient African understanding that the divine is not just something to be worshipped from afar, but something to be experienced and lived in the everyday world. But there is a deeper lesson that we can learn from the legacy of African monotheism, a lesson that transcends religion and speaks to the heart of what it means to be human. This lesson is one of unity, of recognizing that we are all connected, that our spiritual heritage is not defined by borders or by religions, but by our shared connection to the divine. The ancient Africans understood that the Creator is the source of all life, that all of humanity is part of the same divine plan. And this understanding, this vision of unity, is something that has been passed down through the generations, from Africa to the Middle East, from the Hebrews to the Christians, and from the Muslims to the modern world. As we reflect on this shared legacy, we must ask ourselves, what would happen if we embrace this understanding of unity, of shared spiritual heritage, in our modern world? What if we recognized that the spiritual wisdom of Africa is not just an ancient relic, but a living tradition that continues to shape our lives today? What if we saw our connection to the Creator not as something separate from the rest of humanity, but as something that binds us all together in a shared spiritual journey? The legacy of African monotheism is not just a story of the past. It is a story that continues to unfold in the present. It is a story that calls us to embrace our shared humanity, to recognize the divine in all things, and to live our lives in a way that honors the Creator and the creation He has entrusted to us. This is the gift of African monotheism, and it is a gift that we can all carry forward into the future. In the end, the true legacy of monotheism is not just found in the ancient texts or the religious practices that have been passed down through the ages. It is found in the way we live our lives, in the way we treat one another, and in the way we honor the Creator and His creation. It is a legacy that transcends time, culture, and religion, and calls us all to live in harmony with the divine plan that has been laid out before us. And it is a legacy that, when fully embraced, has the power to heal, to unite, and to transform the world. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to take a moment to reflect on the deeper truths we've uncovered, truths that stretch beyond the pages of ancient texts and into the very core of who we are as human beings. We've explored the roots of monotheism, a force that has shaped not only the history of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but the spiritual fabric of our world itself. The African civilizations, Egypt, Nubia, Sudan, carried within them the wisdom of the ages, a wisdom that spoke of a singular creator, a divine force that bound together the heavens and the earth, a God who was as present in the stars as in the very breath we take. This divine understanding was not some isolated revelation. It was a truth shared across continents, passed down through generations, and it has continued to resonate through the sacred texts of the Abrahamic faiths. And yet, despite the power of these spiritual legacies, we find that much of this rich history has been overlooked, hidden in the shadows of time. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that our faiths, our beliefs, and our understanding of the Creator exist in isolation, separate from one another, and separate from the wisdom of the past. But as we have discovered in this video, the truth is far more profound. The origins of the God we worship are not bound by the pages of any single scripture. They are interwoven with the cultures and civilizations that came before us. The Creator who is present in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is the same Creator who breathed life into the civilizations of Africa, who inspired the monotheistic beliefs that existed long before the Abrahamic religions emerged. It is the same divine force that transcends time, culture, and borders, uniting all of humanity in a shared spiritual journey. What if, instead of dividing ourselves along religious lines, we embraced the truth that our faiths are more alike than they are different? What if we saw the Creator as the universal source of all life, a divine force that unites us all, regardless of our cultural backgrounds or religious beliefs? This is the healing truth we have uncovered today. The understanding that our shared spiritual heritage binds us together in a way that transcends the divisions that have separated us for so long. When we look at the history of monotheism, when we see how the wisdom of ancient Africa shaped the development of the Abrahamic faiths, we are reminded of the deep connection we all share as children of the same Creator. We are all part of the same divine story, and the Creator's love, grace, and wisdom flow through each of us, regardless of our differences. I invite you to reflect on this truth, to let it sink deep into your heart. The legacy of African monotheism is not just a story of the past. It is a living, breathing legacy that continues to shape the world today. The spiritual practices, rituals, and beliefs that were passed down through generations are not just relics of a bygone age. They are the foundation upon which the Abrahamic faiths have been built. And now, it's our turn to honor that legacy, to recognize the shared wisdom of humanity, and to let that wisdom guide us as we move forward together. If this video has resonated with you, if it has touched your soul in a way that brings clarity, peace, or healing, I ask that you consider showing your support in any way you can. If you feel that this message has brought you closer to the light, that it has offered you a deeper understanding of the divine, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who may benefit from it. Your support means more than you know. It is the energy that fuels this channel, allowing me to continue bringing these messages of love, healing, and truth to the world. Every like, every comment, and every subscription is not just an affirmation of this work. It is a shared commitment to spreading the light of knowledge and understanding in a world that so desperately needs it. If you found value in this video, if you feel that it has nourished your spirit or brought you closer to the divine truth that we all share, I invite you to lend your support in whatever way feels right for you. Every gesture, no matter how small, helps to keep this work going, to bring more light into the world, and to share the wisdom that has been passed down through the ages. Your contribution, your presence here, makes all the difference, and for that, I thank you with all my heart. I encourage you to leave a comment below, to share your thoughts and reflections on what we've explored together. Your voice matters. Your journey matters. This community is built on the shared belief that we are all connected, that we are all children of the same Creator, and that together we can heal, grow, and transform the world. As we go forward, let us remember that the Creator's love is not confined to one people or one religion. It is a universal love, one that unites us all in our shared humanity. And as we carry forward the legacy of monotheism, let us do so with an open heart, a heart that embraces the wisdom of the past and the hope for a future where all people can live in harmony, guided by the light of the Creator. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Your support is a blessing, and I look forward to continuing this path of discovery, learning, and growth together. May the divine light shine within you, and may you carry this light into the world, spreading healing, peace, and understanding wherever you go.